Hello, hello, and welcome. You are watching the Zenith Glow astrology broadcast. My name is Christina, and I will be your host today, your friendly neighborhood astrologer. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am so happy to have you here. You guys will have to please excuse me. I am just getting over a cold, and so my voice might be a little bit deeper than normal. Not quite as, sexy husky as like Katharine Hepburn or anything, but I got a little bit of that post cold grunge in my voice right now, so please forgive me. I do have my tea though to keep me going here. I might cough occasionally. It's all good. We're all here together. As well, because I'm getting over being sick, I might be a little bit mentally all over the place. So I have some notes here. Okay, that's enough, you know, precursor, whatever. I'm a flawed human. We're all here together. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for your grace. Uh, so today we are going to be talking about one of the prominent upcoming transits for the month of March and actually going into April as well, which is the Venus retrograde. Now you might be like, well, wait a minute, didn't something just stop being retrograde recently? You are correct. Mars has actually been retrograde since early December. And it is going direct on February 23rd, stationing direct. But Mars and Venus are kind of tag teaming it, and now Venus is going to be going retrograde, which does not always happen. Mars goes retrograde about every 2 years, and Venus goes retrograde about every 18 months. So they are close together in their retrograde cycles, but they don't always go back to back like this. So it's kind of special. There's going to be a lot going on in the month of March. We have eclipse season coming up. We have some outer planets that are going to be changing signs. We have the Venus retrograde. We have a Mercury retrograde. My gosh, you guys, there's so much going on at this time. And I thought February was kind of intense. Honestly, February is like the in breath before all this other stuff happens as we move into spring. Spring equinox, that's another thing we have going on in the month of March. So, yeah, there's a lot happening. We will be going into those other transits and getting into the nitty gritty of all that at another time. But today, I want to just focus on beautiful Venus. Beautiful Venus, the planet of beauty and love. And let's talk about what does it mean when Venus goes retrograde through transit and what can we expect from this particular retrograde. So we're going to get into some of the technical stuff, not like real technical. I'm just going to give you guys some dates and talk about some other transits that are going on, or rather some aspects that Venus is making through her retrograde cycle. And then we are going to talk a little bit about the mundane meaning of Venus retrograde. Mundane meaning the world. So, more of the 3D kind of perspective, because even though, most of the people that tune into my work are on that higher 5D timeline, even though most of us are on the spiritual path, I think it's really important that we also stay grounded. Uh, Spiritual path is beautiful, totally happy to be on it, grateful to be on it. But again, we are also here on earth, and part of our task is to bridge the physical and the spiritual. So we are going to talk a little bit. What does it mean when Venus is retrograde from that more 3D perspective? What can you expect from that? And then we are also going to talk about the more 5D, higher spiritual stuff and what could potentially happen or not happen as a result of Venus being retrograde. So let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to take a little sip of my tea. Thank you for being patient. And yes, it's my puppy and my name. My puppy. No, kidding. Anyway, oh my gosh. I'm still a little loopy. And I swear I didn't take any like medication or anything. It's just the way I feel when I'm sleep deprived and still trying to get grounded in my body. I've been sick for so long. So, anyway, speaking of puppies, the puppies are with me today. So if you hear any wrestling or thumps or thuds going on in the background or chewing noises, they're here. giving us their love. So, okay, Venus retrograde. So, like I said, Mars just went direct, and now it's tagging Venus, and Venus is going to go through her own retrograde cycle. Again, this happens about every 18 months. It's a natural occurrence. Um, and so, for this particular retrograde cycle, Venus will turn retrograde on March 1st, and she will stay retrograde until April 12th. So we have approximately 6 weeks of Venus retrograde this year. All right. And this is happening right in the midst of eclipse season and all those other things going on through the month of March. And then again, we do also have a Mercury retrograde that's going to happen shortly after Venus turns retrograde. So there, even though we are getting into spring, and the spring equinox has this very like forward momentum kind of energy. And we have a lot of planets that are shifting into the sign of Aries, which again has this very forward momentum kind of energy. We're still being called to kind of put on the brakes a little bit before we totally jump headfirst into whatever endeavors we're being called toward. Um, and I think this is important. I think it's significant that it's happening now. Venus is going to be, let me just say this. So, Venus is going to turn retrograde at 10 degrees of Aries, and then she's going to backtrack all the way to 24 degrees of Pisces. Okay. So, she is bridging together. Once again, we have this water and fire conjunction going on. And that's something I talked about in my first podcast of the year, where I go into 2025 and the bridging together of the water and the fire element. Again, we are in the year of the wood snake, so there's a lot of change and transformation going on. And water and fire are significant because they both have this very kind of plasmic energy, very different energy, but I would say among all of the elements, they are the two most spiritual elements. So it's kind of interesting when you look at it from that perspective, that there's something going on where we are bridging together water and fire. Fire is that desire to take action, and it's that spiritual inspiration that kind of comes to us through the divine. And then we have water, which is really tied into our emotions and our psyche, and it's very feminine. We have a masculine and a feminine, right? Fire and water. So again, bridging together these energies, finding ways to harmonize things that seem seemingly incompatible on the surface, but are actually very much they can be kind of harnessed and yoked together to work towards a common purpose. And one of the ways I like to think of this, and I'm not going to go too much into this, I just wanted to kind of elaborate a little bit and put on my nerdy astrological glasses for a minute. So one of the ways I like to think of this is by looking at the signs of Sagittarius and Pisces, okay? Because these are two signs that are fire and water. And when planets are in those signs, they are squaring each other, right? So they're kind of like, it's seemingly at this cross purpose, right? Like they're squaring. I want this, I want this. But both Pisces and Sagittarius are traditionally, prior to the discovery of Neptune, ruled by Jupiter. Okay. So it's something just to kind of keep in the back of your mind when we're talking about bridging these fire and water elements together. Because again, when you look at it from that perspective, they are incredibly spiritual. It's just the way you're going about that spirituality or that purpose or whatever it is that you're working with in the spiritual realms is a little bit different from each other. One is more masculine and active in its principle, and one is more receptive and feminine in its principle, but the two can harmonize together. So, just something to consider. So, Venus going between Pisces and Aries. This is another interesting bridge that we're working with. And again, we're working with this through outer planets as well this year, because we have Saturn that's going to shift from Pisces into Aries. Now, it's not going to station permanently in Aries until 2026. So, and I wrote this down just so that I have specifics to give you guys. So, Saturn is first going to step into Aries this year on May 26th. It's going to stay there for a little while until it hits its retrograde cycle. Then it's going to retrograde back into the sign of Pisces on September 1st. There it will stay until February 14th, 2026. Interesting how these transits keep aligning with like holidays and significant numerological days and things like that. So that'll be interesting. But once it hits Aries again, February 14th, 2026, it's done. It's not going to go back into Pisces again. So we're going to get that first taste of Saturn and Aries energy. But again, it's going to be doing kind of what Venus is doing right now, which is sort of meandering between the signs and, you know, integrating those energies together, right? As we step from one sign or element into the other one, we almost have like one slit in each world. And we're sort of figuring out, how can I harmonize these two elements? What do they have in common? In astrology, when you have two planets that are in adjacent signs and they're making an aspect to each other, it's called a semi-sextile. Okay, and it's considered a minor aspect because they're about 30 degrees apart. So the influence of it is more subtle, it's more subconscious. A lot of astrologers don't really talk about it that much, myself included, because, you know, we tend to pay attention to the more major aspects when things happen. But it is still an aspect, it is still an energy, a conversation that those two planets are having, and they're bringing the energy of the adjacent signs. It's not the easiest uh, element or energetic expression, archetype, to merge together because they are in different elements. Um, and they're also in different qualities, right? So in the case of Pisces, we have water that is mutable. And in the case of Aries, we have fire that is cardinal. So different qualities, different elements, not the easiest to wrangle together. But if you can, you know, the semi-sextile is considered still a harmonious, albeit somewhat tricky, aspect. So if you can harmonize those energies, if you can get those planets to talk to each other, then there's something beautiful that can emerge from that. There's something dynamic and something that can happen on a deep level that propels you towards greater growth. So just something to consider. And again, I'm not saying that there are planets aspecting each other, but just from a symbolic level when we look at the quality of those two adjacent energies. All right, I'm getting like way lost in my nerdy astrological realms here. Uh, so Venus is doing this dance between Pisces and Aries, right? She already left Pisces. She's in Aries now. She's going to turn retrograde on March 1st, and then she's going to slowly backtrack all the way to 24 degrees of Pisces. She's going to make some aspects with some significant planets as she does that, and then she's going to come to a stop and then go forward again back into Aries. So we have this back and forth motion of the retrograde, this little dance that she's doing where she's bringing information from Aries and saying, wait a minute, I got to go back into Pisces and go back over this stuff again and make sure that I fully understand it and integrate it before I can really charge forward again. So there's something that we're reviewing, right? This is what always happens when planets go retrograde, particularly these personal planets. And again, this is very significant to have all three of our personal planets, bam, 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 going retrograde consecutively in this such a short period of time like this. So there's a lot that we are needing to revisit and recalibrate before we can really move forward. And it makes sense because, you know, if you watched my new moon video, new moon in Aquarius at the beginning of January, which is right around the time that Venus entered her pre-retrograde shadow, mind you, that I talked about stepping through a portal and moving into a different timeline, which we all have done. But when you move into a different timeline, it's not cut and dry. You know, there's not like this hard line where you're like, I'm in this timeline and now I've stepped into this one and the door on that old one is shut. It doesn't quite work that way. You know, there's a little bit of like this blurriness, this kind of blending between the timelines because we're still carrying old memories and habits and karma and different things from the old timeline that we have to recalibrate to kind of readjust to the new timeline. And that's sort of what we're doing right now. We're kind of getting rid of stuff that doesn't really belong. The Leo full moon that we had recently had a lot to do with that, shedding stuff that doesn't really belong with us in the new timeline. And I would say that we're still feeling the effects of that. I certainly am. And like I said, I got sick on the full moon. And I know a lot of people that got sick on the full moon. And when I talked to my higher self about it, I asked her, and she's fabulous. I asked her why. Why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why are we all getting sick? And she said it's because we are purging. So the sickness is actually just a symptom of what's going on energetically and emotionally within all of us. And it is helping us to purge energies from our bodies that no longer can exist. We can't bring it with us into this higher frequency timeline. So anyway, again, I digress. Take a little sip. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the more technical stuff just to get it out of the way with Venus retrograde. If you want to make notes of this, you can. If you don't, good for you. I made notes of it so that I can remember everything. But anyway, so Venus, like I said, goes retrograde March 1st through April 12th. She's going to go from 10 degrees of Aries to 24 degrees of Pisces. Shortly after she starts her retrograde cycle, so within 2 weeks of starting her retrograde cycle, on March 14th, Mercury is also going to go retrograde. Okay, so we're going to have double personal planet retrograde energy at this time. So we're really dealing with the more impersonal retrograde stuff that is more of like our mental processes and our ideas and stuff. And then we're getting really deep into the super personal Venus retrograde stuff, which I'll talk about again more in a minute here. Really going into the heart and reviewing things that are related to our emotional centers. Um, and then while it is retrograde Mercury, uh, concurrent with the Venus retrograde, they are also going to be conjunct each other within about 2 to 3 degrees for most of the retrograde period that Mercury's retrograde. So, Mercury will be retrograde for about 3 weeks. And again, Venus will be retrograde for about 6 weeks, so almost double the time. The time that Mercury is retrograde during the Venus retrograde, the two of them are going to be like really close to each other. So that is significant, right? When we have planets that are conjunct, even if they're not exactly conjunct, they're doing this same dance between Aries and Pisces and the early degrees of Aries, no less. So we are talking about really going over our perceptions and our communication and really diving into how does that relate to all these other things that we're reviewing that are tied into our relationships and our hearts. Okay. Not going to super get into the Mercury dynamics because I want to keep this about Venus, but I just wanted to mention that we're going to have a Mercury retrograde simultaneous, and it is part of this energy and this review that we're going through right now. So, other things that are going on during Venus's retrograde. She is going to be conjunct with Neptune once again, and that's going to be on March 27th. That will happen at 29 degrees of Pisces. So, right before Neptune shifts into Aries, we're going to have this Venus Neptune overlap. And this is significant because, even though Jupiter is the greater benefic and Venus is the lesser benefic, okay, however you want to think of that, Neptune is the higher octave of Venus. Why is that? Because Venus has to do with our heart and our emotions and the way that we love and want to be loved. She's very personal. It's the way we relate to other people, right? So it's how we express our love through 3D relationships and through interpersonal communication. Neptune is like the impersonal love. It is agape. It is unconditional universal love. It is God love. Okay, and that is why it is the higher octave of Venus, because it is love without limits. And so having these two planets overlap each other during Venus's retrograde cycle is going to bring up for us the dynamics of love. What does it mean to us to love other people? And we're going to be bringing in these higher consciousness themes into the more mundane interpersonal relationship stuff that Venus usually deals with, okay? And so we're going to be looking at, do I feel unconditionally loved? Do I offer unconditional love to other people? We might have some kind of illusions or delusions about love and idealism coming to light, okay? Because Neptune also deals with illusions and dreams, and it's really not very structured as a planet, as an energy, as an archetype. And so we might have some of that kind of coming up for review. Like, have I over idealized my relationships, or have I been delusional about what I expect from my relationships, or maybe what I bring to my relationships? Maybe I've been delusional about the nature of my relationships and and the future that those relationships have. Okay, we'll get into that again, but I just wanted to mention. So that these are themes that might come up when Venus goes conjunct with Neptune on March 27th. On March 31st, she will also be conjunct with the North Node, and that's going to be at 27 degrees of Pisces. So again, North Node is kind of pointing us towards our spiritual destiny at this time, since it's in the sign of Pisces. And again, we're going to be looking at how do all of these Venusian themes fit in with that destiny. We're reviewing things. Remember, retrogrades are going back over the details, going back over what used to be versus what is now versus where do I want to be. And so we're kind of measuring up. Do these things measure up? Are they fitting in together? And or do things need to change? And again, going to get into the details of that in a minute. Talking more specifics though, so on April 6th, we will, no, on March 23rd, sorry, I'm trying not to jump all over the calendar here. On March 23rd, Venus will be conjunct with the Sun at 2 degrees of Aries, so we might have some kind of illumination coming to us at that time. And then on April 6th, she will form a sextile with Mars, and that will be at 25 degrees of Cancer, okay? So that's actually a harmonious aspect. We might have some kind of um, something that really like gels for us, especially post Mars retrograde, right? Because Mars will be direct at this point, moving direct in Cancer. We've done all of this legwork through the Mars retrograde, and now we're having whatever insights have come to us through that transit come to light in the shadow or in the influence of the Venus retrograde. So, how do I take the Mars stuff that I just dealt with and learned, and how do I apply it to my heart and my desires and my relationships? Okay. So, couple other technical things. During her retrograde cycle, Venus is also going to form a sextile with Uranus and Taurus at 25 degrees of Taurus. So, again, that's once she is in the sign of Pisces. This will be interesting because Venus naturally rules Taurus. Okay, so she's really bringing a lot of energy to Uranus, but Uranus is the outer planet and is acting on Venus through her retrograde cycle. So, there's something really special going on there. And because it's a sextile, it is a harmonious aspect. It's not like as chill as a trine would be considered, but it does offer useful tools. Uranus is giving Venus some useful tools, helping her along as she goes back over all of this reflection and this contemplation as she's in Pisces. Okay. And again, Taurus, it's all about self-worth. It's all about what we value. And Uranus is all about freedom and deconditioning. So there might be something coming to light around that time, some kind of Uranian jolt of epiphany or awareness uh, surrounding, yeah, like how are we feeling in our relationships? Are we feeling free to be ourselves? Are we feeling like we are able to express our heart's desire and live authentic to ourselves in ways that really honor our own path? Or are we kind of being hyper idealistic or kind of sacrificing our boundaries and our priorities for the sake of our relationships? Ooh, yeah, there might be some stuff that comes up. But again, remember that this is a more harmonious aspect. So it's probably not going to sting as much as, say, the recent T-square was that we had with Uranus aspecting the moon and the sun's axis during the full moon in Leo. Okay. We also will have Venus will form a sextile to Pluto in Aquarius on March 22nd before she backtracks into Pisces. So that's another harmonious aspect. And then lastly, this one is really important and significant. At the very end of her retrograde cycle, Venus, in that very last week that she is retrograde, she's actually going to be conjunct with Saturn in Pisces at 25 degrees. So highly significant again, because as I was saying, Saturn is one of those planets that's going to make this jump from Pisces to Aries, along with Neptune. Neptune's doing it as well this year. And so Venus is kind of like laying the groundwork for us. And you notice that she makes aspects to almost all the outer planets during her retrograde cycle, except for Jupiter and Chiron and, some other some other things. The major outer planets, she is making aspects to them. And so, again, all of those planets, whenever we have a slower moving, further out planet make an aspect to a faster moving, closer into us planet, it's the outer planet that is influencing the inner planet. Okay. So, all of these planets are essentially, Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, and Uranus are all delivering insights to Venus as she undergoes this journey through her underworld and her rebirth cycle, which is the retrograde. So, something to keep in mind. And in particular, Saturn and Pisces, just with it moving into the final degrees of Pisces, I have already noticed an uptick or an intensification, if that's the right word, of the themes of Saturn and Pisces. It's like reaching the crescendo period. We're getting the climax of those lessons, of those energies, because once Saturn leaves a sign or a house, if in your personal chart, for good, like it's not going to backtrack into it again. Once it's done in a sign or house, it always leaves us with a gift. Okay, because Saturn's kind of a ball buster. Excuse me for saying so, but it is. It's a hard teacher. If you've ever seen that movie Kill Bill, I always liken Saturn to Pai Mei, which is Uma Thurman's, um, her instructor, her teacher, the one who teaches her kung fu and all these things. Uh, yeah, he's like a really hardcore teacher and he's super strict and he's awful to the point of almost torturing her. But by the time she gets done with her training, she's a badass and she's really good at what she does. And she wouldn't have been able to do that if she didn't have the strict tutelage, the cruel tutelage of Pai Mei. So I always liken the lessons of Saturn to being a little bit like Pai Mei. Uh, just that it's tough and sometimes it's really high pressure and challenging and it can be downright depressing sometimes to deal with, but when we get through those Saturn lessons, at the end of it, we are stronger, we are wiser, we are more competent, and we are better able to construct something on our own foundation to build towards the future for ourselves. So, anyway, all of that is to say, to have Venus conclude her retrograde cycle in conjunction with Saturn is highly significant as Saturn is moving through this very last decan of Pisces. And so, again, there is kind of this personal authority coming up through our spirituality, but also through our ideals, our visions for the future, our dreams, and what we want to see manifest. And so Venus is kind of going through a review process and checking in with that. Am I really being a personal authority? Am I standing in my power? Or am I kind of compromising my expression and my heart's desire because I want to be perceived a certain way by other people? You know, that's one of those like lower expressions of Saturn. You know, in its highest expression, it holds integrity no matter what and remains true to the self and to whatever its goals, its aims are. And those things have a lot of integrity, right? It works really hard to accomplish what it needs to accomplish. But when you get into the lower expressions, Saturn cares a little too much about its reputation. And so if other people are perceiving it to be a certain way, it might bend in its or sway in its aims, in its goals. It might compromise what it's doing to get the applause or to get the approval. Um, it might do things that are not totally in integrity to accomplish its goals, that kind of thing. So again, when we're merging that archetype with the archetype of our self-worth and our heart's desire and our relationships, you can kind of see how these things would come up for review. You know, how are we doing? Okay. All right. So those are the technical things going on during the Venus retrograde. And I'll add, you know, we've got an eclipse on March 14th, the day that Mercury goes retrograde. And then we have another eclipse on March 29th, which is also the same time that Neptune changes signs and it goes into Aries. There's so much going on through March, you guys. It's really intense. Brace yourselves and pace yourselves. Because, yeah, we just need to breathe through it and ride the waves, okay? So, what does it mean when Venus goes retrograde? So, we already know that when personal planets go retrograde, things are coming up for review, right? Everything that ties into that prefix, I'm sure you've heard other astrologers say, remembering and revisiting and reevaluating, things like that, are all sanctioned retrograde activities. And it is true, it's not really advisable to push forward with brand new things when you're in a retrograde cycle. And the reason for that is because the retrograde is necessary in order for the planet to integrate all of the lessons that it has been accruing up until this point in its cycle. So before it goes retrograde, it actually crosses this point where it's sort of like functioning out of bounds. And this is kind of on like a more societal collective sense, right? Like the way that we do Mars stuff was out of bounds last October. And then eventually Mars had to turn retrograde so we could go back over and say, whoa, wait a minute, I got to revisit this stuff. Like, are my desires really in alignment with what I want? Or how am I being in my masculine energy? Or is that like a little too much? You know, we really need to revisit those things because it's sort of like as a society, we gain this inertia, right? Like we start plugging along and doing things a certain way, and we're just going to keep step, 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 and this is how we do it. And eventually, you have to kind of put on the brakes and stop and reassess. Uh, is this really what I want? Is this really who I am? What am I working towards? How have I changed since the last retrograde cycle? Which is something to consider. And also, so Venus was last retrograde. Let's see, did I write it down? I did not. She was last retrograde, I want to say it was like July 22nd ish, 2023, through early September, like the first day of September, I think. So go back to summer of 2023 when she was retrograde through the late degrees of Leo, okay? And think about that time. What was different for you? This is about a year and a half ago. What was different for you? How have you changed since then? And then again, because we're talking about Venus, right? Venus governs our values. She's really all about our values at the core of who she is. Now, this bleeds out into how do I earn money to survive? And what kind of relationships do I want to have? What kind of stuff do I want to accrue that gives me a feeling of safety and harmony? But it really comes down to what we value. And when you dig underneath that layer of things, it's really about how you value yourself. It all comes down to this. Venus rules Taurus first and foremost, okay? She also rules Libra, but we start with Taurus, right? And Taurus is all about self-worth. How do I feel secure in myself? I have to love myself before I can love other people. Taurus, Libra. Like, I cannot bring love to other people until I establish it within myself. I cannot share myself with other people until I know who I am, until I see who I am, and until I truly love and accept who I am unconditionally, which is that higher Neptune octave. So we can see how the higher dimensional stuff is filtering down into the 3D stuff, right? So yeah, on this 3D level, it starts with that. Like, what do I value? Do I value myself? And how I value myself is ultimately going to determine all the external Venusian themes, right? Like, what kind of house I live in, what kind of job am I working, how much money can I earn for a living, what sort of things do I own, and then what kind of relationships do I have with other people? What gives me a sense of peace and harmony in my relationships? How do I feel like I want to love other people? And what do I need in order to feel loved by other people? All of these things, sorry, little microphone, all of these things coalesce together under this central theme of how do I value myself? What is my self worth? Okay. So these are the things that are coming up for review. And again, it's like society has an idea of this, right? And society will tell us, I'm sorry, I'm just like throwing things here. I'm getting so excited. Venus is very prominent in my chart, you guys. And I don't know, she's just like speaking through me. So society has an idea of what does self-gratification mean? You know, what are you supposed to be happy with? What are you supposed to want? What should you be desiring? What should you be acquiring? How should you be surviving? Society tells us all of these things, right? And whether we realize it or not, to some degree, we kind of uh, integrate some of that into our consciousness. You know, even if you're super Aquarian and you're like, screw society, I don't want anything to do with society, there's still some part of us, and maybe this is your shadow, and maybe that's something that you need to look at through this Venus retrograde. But there's always some part of us that kind of, you know, takes on those societal perceptions to a degree. And this is where we have to kind of stop and check in and be like, hey, I've been riding this train for the last 18 months. Do I want to get off at a different station or do I want to keep going? Do I like the way this is going or have things changed? Has my destination changed? Um, and that's really what we're looking at. And that's where it's helpful to go back to previous Venus retrograde cycles, summer of 2023, to analyze and reflect on how you have changed, what has changed in your life. If you're anything like me, a whole hell of a lot has changed for you. You know, I look at who I was in the summer of 2023 and I'm kind of amazed. I'm sort of amazed because it's only been 18 months and I feel in some ways like a completely different person. And I mean, that's a beautiful thing because it means that I'm growing and that I'm changing and I'm embracing that change. Woo, go me. But at the same time, there's certain things that maybe were implemented at that time or that I've just kind of carried forward without really checking in that maybe don't apply to me anymore. And maybe I need to go back and consider, is this really what I want to create? Is this in alignment with my heart? That's really what it comes down to. How has your heart changed in this time? And what does your heart want now? Venus is all about beauty and love and harmony, right? So let's consider that. Like, what do you need to feel harmonious in your life? What do you find beautiful? What inspires you? What makes you feel at home in yourself and in the world? And then what makes you feel truly loved? What can you give to yourself to make you feel loved? And then what do you have to give to other people that you want to express uh, as your language of love? What can you share with others? So all of this is up for review right now. Now, this is just Venus in general. She's also traveling, betwixt these two signs, Pisces and Aries. So we also need to consider those elements and those themes, right? Now, Aries and Pisces are really interesting because they naturally rule the 12th house, Pisces, and then Aries naturally rules the first house. So when we look at the zodiac wheel, it is the ending and the beginning, right? We have the conclusion of our journey through the first through the 12th houses, and we kind of synthesize all of our experiences in the 12th house, and then we dissolve, right? Because Neptune and Pisces in the 12th house, they relate to dissolution. And it really, like on a higher 5D symbolic level, it has to do with dissolving your ego because you go through all of these experiences, the first through the 12th house, where you're kind of acquiring your identity through, your upbringing and through your personal experiences, your relationships, your contact with society, your career, all these different aspects of living as a human on earth. They all kind of get layered on to who am I as a person, right? By the time you get to the 12th house, it becomes so much bigger than you and your experience. And it becomes collective. It becomes collective consciousness. And then suddenly you're kind of like stripped away from this identity that you've carried. And you're meant to merge with the divine. You're meant to become greater than just the little you. It's when the drop returns to the ocean, right? If you've ever heard that metaphor. So it is when we re-merge with collective consciousness or source or spirit or however you want to think of that. And so because of that, this energy of Pisces can hold a lot of fear because if we are still clinging to the ego and to the identity and the experiences that we've had, the idea of separating from that and merging with something greater than ourselves is kind of like chaotic, or it can feel like you're stepping into the abyss, right? And so Pisces governs the axis of fear and faith, right? Because it has to do with stepping into the unknown, but you do it with a sense of faith, and that's what gets you through, okay? I'm getting like way philosophical here. But just to give you an idea of what the archetype stands for, right? This is why Pisces is related to dreams and idealism because it transcends form, right? And then, of course, we need the polarity of Pisces, which is Virgo, which, by the way, our first eclipse of this new season on March 14th, the day that Mercury goes retrograde. That is a lunar eclipse in Virgo. Okay, so it does tie into this energy because Virgo is the counterbalance to Pisces. Virgo is all about details and it's very grounded and it's very pragmatic. And we need some of that detailed, pragmatic energy to balance this kind of fluid, airy fairy, dreamy, cosmic energy that Pisces is bringing in. It's very watery, it's very fluid. So, okay, going back to getting on track here. Um, so we have this first archetype of Pisces, right? And this is what Neptune and Saturn are kind of wrapping up thematically as they prepare to step into Aries. So then Aries is the first house of the zodiac. archetypally, okay? So we go from the last to the first. What happens? Well, the drop goes into the ocean and it becomes the ocean, and it kind of gets to float around in the ocean and get to experience bliss and oneness and all that awesome spiritual stuff. And then it says, okay, I'm ready to go back in. Put me back in there. Put me in, coach. So then the drop separates from the ocean again and becomes a drop, and it returns into the incarnational cycle. And then we have the first house, ego, identity, a sense of purpose, a sense of a goal, a sense of a destiny. You come to earth with some idea that you're here to accomplish something, whether you know it or not. You know, most of us are not just kind of like floating around in the ether doing nothing with no goals and no hopes or dreams or wishes or drives towards the future. No, most of us, even if it's more unconscious or somewhat ill defined, we have a sense of purpose. We have a feeling like we are being called towards something. That is Aries energy. And Aries is all about taking action. Okay. So, one, it is the ego. Like Aries is figuring out, who am I? And the way I'm going to figure that out is I'm going to do a bunch of stuff. I'm going to just take action. I'm just going to be impulsive. I want to do this. I want to go there. I want to touch that. I want to taste this. I want to see this. And through those experiences that it acquires, it starts to learn who it is, right? It starts to figure out, okay, this is who I am. And it feels this calling towards the future. This is why it's a cardinal sign, because it feels the need to propel forward and to take action and to move towards some kind of special destiny. That is the energy of Aries. So we have Venus. Poor microphone. I'm doing this again, you guys. I'm getting like really excited and talking with my hands. So we have Venus who moved into Aries. And again, we're talking about our heart's desires, right? So there's some kind of desire for a purpose. There's some kind of drive propelling us forward that we feel might bring us some kind of satisfaction. And that's going to aid our self worth and our sense of harmony in ourselves. And it might influence our relationships in the way that we love and want to be loved. But before we can really jump forward and dive into that action, there's a need to go back over the details again and revisit Pisces, because what we build on in Aries was initially seated in Pisces, right? Even if it's unconscious. So there's some kind of dream, there's some kind of ideal, there's some kind of wish going on in Pisces. And we need to revisit that and figure out, is that in alignment with this new destiny? Can I merge these two energies together or not? And if I can't, then I need to rework that. I need to reintegrate and figure out what needs to go and what needs to stay. And this is where it really helps to go back over the past stuff and look at the previous Venus retrograde cycle, because what you were dealing with back then is likely quite different from what you're dealing with now, especially with regard to what you're trying to build in your life and who you see yourself as now. Um, so yeah, I hope this isn't too much, you guys. I just tend to go on and on. Um, but yes, so we need to consider the sign that Venus is in, signs, and how we can merge this spiritual purpose, this spiritual calling. Again, she's going to be conjunct with Neptune and the North Node as she backtracks into Pisces. How can we integrate that with whatever this special sense of purpose and destiny is? And also remember that Venus in Aries is very forward. You know, Aries is like no frills, no no qualms. It just kind of acts. It's very impulsive, and that can be a beautiful thing. Of course, it can get us into trouble sometimes, but especially when you're talking about dealing with truth and authenticity, it can be a really beautiful thing. And sometimes Venus needs a little bit of that energy. You know, Aries is naturally ruled by Mars, and so it kind of has a masculine energy to it. And that might not be the most comfortable thing for Venus, but it can be really good for the growth of Venus or how we express Venusian energy, because it is Venus's tendency to be more reticent and to be more receptive and feminine. But that can also mean that we self-censor, that we don't stand up for ourselves when we need to, that we're not taking initiative and action on things that we truly want and desire, that we're not really speaking our truth because we're afraid of making waves. It could mean all of these things. And so, yes, having Venus in Aries could give us a leg up in terms of going after what we really want. But again, we need to revisit the Pisces stuff before we can do that. Now, I can't tell you the specifics of this next thing that I'm going to say, but you can pull up your own chart to kind of glean some information about this. You also want to consider which houses Venus will be retrograding through in your chart. And again, that's going to be different for every person. So you have to pull up a chart, but you can pull up your own natal chart and you can look to see where is this line between 10 degrees of Aries and 24 degrees of Pisces. Where does that lie in my chart? What house or houses is Venus going to cross through? And that will give you more information about where these themes are going to show up for you. So, for example, if Venus was transiting through your fourth house, you might be dealing with your family and your home life. You might be having some confrontations with people like your family, and you might be dealing with stuff surrounding your home. You might be dealing with deeper psychological stuff going on within you, all kind of coming up to be reevaluated. If it's happening in your seventh house, that's pretty direct, like in terms of relationships. You might be having these themes show up in your relationships. Like, how am I asserting myself in my relationships? Am I having the independence that I really crave, or am I sacrificing my boundaries for the sake of some kind of perceived harmony that isn't really harmonious because I don't feel harmonious deep down inside? You know what I mean? So these are just like some ideas. Could it be happening in your 10th house of career? Um, could it be happening in your 11th house of long-term goals and wishes and social networks and friendships and all these things? So just look at what house this retrograde is going to be happening in for you to give you more information on where this is going to show up for you. Okay. And that will give you um, a little bit of a guide. You can kind of keep an eye out on it as it shows up, and then you can sort of process these themes and figure out, like, how do I want to rework this stuff. Excuse me. So let's see, did I forget anything? Yes, I did. So on a lot of this has been the mundane level, right? Like, and again, to continue with that mundane stuff, Venus also relates to how we earn money. Okay, and it's not just money, it's really resources for survival. But in this world that we live in, money is one of those key resources, okay? So Venus is all about attraction. She is the principle of attraction. She is drawing to her what she needs for safety and survival, okay? And this is the Taurus kind of energy of Venus. So these might be things that come up for us during this retrograde period. Do I have enough money? How am I earning money? Have the ventures, the endeavors in which I have invested my energy and my time and my effort into, are they producing the financial benefits that I want to see from them? Okay. As well as the things that you own, like, and even things like your aesthetic, like the way I wear my hair and the wardrobe that I have, and the way I decorate my home. Again, these are mundane 3D things, but consider that they are reflections of deeper spiritual growth that's going on underneath the surface, okay? You might one day wake up and realize, I need to be blonde. I don't know why. I've had brown hair my whole life, and I just now realized that I am a blonde at my deepest level. So I'm going to go bleach my hair. And that might seem like a silly or material kind of surface level thing, but maybe there's something going on below the surface that's compelling you to feel that way. Maybe something within you is feeling out of alignment, and the spiritual influences the physical and vice versa. So as we take these steps in the physical to recalibrate and reevaluate what it is we need to recalibrate, it can have an influence on those deeper spiritual processes that we're undergoing. Okay, so don't ever dismiss something because it might seem silly or frivolous to you. I think that a lot of spiritual people do this. We get on the spiritual path and it's all about synchronicity and signs and connecting with the higher self and reading the energies and what is my mission and I have to be of service and how am I acting from my heart. That's all beautiful stuff, but don't neglect the 3D stuff too. I'm not saying that you have to prioritize dyeing your hair over your spiritual mission. What I'm saying is that don't um don't make the mistake of assuming that it doesn't have meaning, because everything in your life has meaning if you're willing to listen to it, if you're willing to tap into it and really dig into what's kind of moving underneath the surface of those compulsions and those experiences. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So Venus retrograde. Now, with that being said, I highly recommend, as your friendly neighborhood astrologer, that you don't dye your hair blonde or whatever it is until after Venus goes direct. The reason why, because when we go through retrograde cycles, there is often information that has not yet surfaced, okay? Ideas or feelings, different things like that that have not surfaced yet, okay? We are going back over things. It is a perfect time to revisit. Maybe you want to look at pictures of yourself from high school or whatever. And hey, I used to really like wearing my hair that way. Okay, great. Make a note of it. Go book an appointment with your hairdresser after Venus goes direct, okay? And then see what happens, because you never know. By the time you get to that appointment, you might be like, oh, but I remember now when I used to wear my hair that way, it drove me crazy because of X, Y, and Z. Whatever it is, this is just a simple example. But the idea is that you don't have all the information yet. You're kind of in process. Everything is under review. Everything is changing. You're going through a rebirth of your heart during a Venus retrograde. We all are. So understand that any kind of long-term commitments or things that you can't back out of, or things that you're going to feel sick over if you lose money over it, or you just make a commitment that you can't get out of, understand that it is very likely you will feel differently about those things once we're out of the Venus shadow post retrograde. Okay. So again, it's not a good time to make commitments. It's not a good time to sign contracts. It's not a good time to make irreversible changes to your appearance, like getting a tattoo or something. It's not a good time to make huge investments that you can't get back. Now, if it's something more short term, and again, this is all mundane stuff, guys, but again, don't make the mistake of assuming that the mundane has nothing to do with the spiritual journey, okay? You pull meaning out of your experiences. So it is up to you ultimately what you get from this stuff. But we're not all like yogis sitting on a mountaintop going through ascension right now. No, we're in the 3D. We're bringing the spiritual into the physical. Okay, sorry, I digress. So, if there's something that you maybe wouldn't feel totally sick over losing, like, hey, I think that I could buy these new clothes and hey, you know what, if I decide I don't like them later, no sweat, doesn't really matter. Stuff like that is fine during a Venus retrograde, and it can be a good time to try new things as long as you're okay potentially losing out on whatever money or energy you invest in that thing. Does that make sense? So again, maybe don't get a tattoo, but maybe get some temporary tattoos and try on different things to see how you like it, because you're sort of reevaluating your sense of self as we go through the Venus retrograde. Okay? So that is very like mundane, down to earth kind of interpretation of this stuff. Now, part of that as well, because Venus has to do with relationships, how we love and want to be loved. Excuse me, guys. Our relationships will also be coming under review. And this can be love relationships like romance, but it can also be relationships with family and friends, and really just how we love and want to be loved in all of its different forms. So it's a really wonderful time to reconnect with people that we already know and already have those established relationships with. It's a good time for relationship counseling or going through and reevaluating or kind of really working out the kinks, working out the things that maybe haven't been working so well for you. Because again, we all change and we all grow, and as we shift in our soul's evolution, our relationships will naturally shift in their dynamics. So it's kind of just a great time to go in and give it a little tune-up, okay? It's a great time to reconnect with people that you already know. You might find during a Venus retrograde that you have people from your past resurfacing. It's a very, very, very common thing. So you might have ex-lovers, or you might have former friends, you might have old family members, all kinds of people, old colleagues, people just from your past that resurface. Understand that the purpose of having people like this resurface in your life during a retrograde is so that you can revisit who you were when you knew that person in order to reevaluate if you are still in alignment with whoever that was or if you've totally changed. All of this is to kind of give you a sense of who you are now and what you want from your life as you move forward, what you are seeking to attract and create as you move forward. So just be aware those things can happen, and it's okay if it does, and use it as an opportunity to check in with yourself. Hey, have I changed a lot since then? Or do I still consider myself that same kind of a person? I don't know. So that is one thing that can happen during these retrograde cycles. Now, another thing, now this is something that I actually got from my higher self because I needed to get the 5D information, and there's no handbooks out there that I'm aware of that give this information. So take it with a grain of salt, which really applies to everything that I'm sharing with you. Take it with a grain of salt. Take what resonates and leave the rest, okay? But I'm going to offer it here for you in case it does resonate. I was curious to know because, and I will talk about this when I do my eclipse videos, but I'm going to give you a little teaser right now. When we have eclipses, because they can bring in fated events, because they can align us with our destiny, part of the impact of eclipses can be, I'm not saying it will, but it can be to unite you with your twin flame or your soulmate or your destined partnership, okay? This is one of the things that can happen when we go through eclipse seasons, okay? Now, it will also deliver endings and cancellations, or it will shift things in your life if there is stuff that is impeding your ability to unite with your twin flame. Okay. Now, again, Venus will be retrograde during the eclipse season. So I wanted to know, well, wait a minute. Venus retrograde is a time when people from our past can resurface. It's generally not a good time to make new commitments or start new relationships. That's like astrology 101. You typically, as an astrologer, did not recommend that people get married during a Venus retrograde or that you start new relationships or make long-term commitments during a Venus retrograde. But I was thinking about it and I thought, well, Venus is going to be retrograde during the eclipses, and eclipses can bring in these fated partnerships, these twin flame unions. Technically, our twin flames are old souls that we've known from past lives, right? So even though we may not have met these individuals in our current incarnation, so from like that linear 3D perspective, it would be a new relationship. From a higher 5D perspective, it would be an old relationship resurfacing in the current incarnation. And I wanted to know, is that legit? Is that something that can actually happen? And what I got from my higher self is yes. So, again, take it with a grain of salt, but I do believe that there is the potential for those who have a twin flame partnership, or there is the desire for that, or it's part of your plan, it's part of your fate, there is actually the potential that that could surface for you during this Venus retrograde. Now, how does that work? Because we're doing all of this self evaluation and we're figuring out what we want, and you're not supposed to start new relationships and all that jazz, right? Well, the thing is that your twin flame partnership, no matter how it shows up for you and no matter what kind of challenges you encounter through it, it is always going to serve the purpose to recalibrate you to your most authentic soul signature. Okay. Now, oftentimes that can be challenging because our twin flames are like mirrors and they show us our shadows, and it's not always fun. Sometimes it can be difficult, right? But ultimately, it is serving the purpose to recalibrate you to your most authentic soul expression. So, yes, during a Venus retrograde and during this Venus retrograde, which happens to coincide with eclipses, which bring in faded relationships and twin flame connections, it is possible for those who are in alignment and ready for it that you might have your twin flame surface during this Venus retrograde. Just throwing that out there for you. Okay, let's see. Did I miss anything? I don't think I did, you guys. I've been talking for quite a bit. I'll just say that, uh, once again, just to reiterate, Venus goes retrograde March 1st. She will be retrograde until April 12th. She started her pre-retrograde shadow going all the way back to January 26th. If you recall, this was right before the new moon in Aquarius, which is significant. And if you're anything like me, you might have had some sudden shifts in consciousness occur around that time. I definitely did. Okay, she will be in her post shadow all the way until May 12th. Now, typically, the Venus retrograde rules still apply while she's in her shadow period, but think of it like the moon's cycles, the waxing and the waning of the moon, okay? Let me explain. When we are approaching a full moon, we get this period of intensity as the moon is building, okay? Then we get the full moon, and it's like, bam, full moon energy. Then we move into the waning period, and the moon begins to get smaller. So we still feel the intensity of the full moon, but it starts to back off a little bit. It goes the same way with retrograde cycles, okay? So we get into the pre retrograde cycle, and it kind of starts smaller. And then we start to feel, and mind you, this started January 26th for the Venus retrograde. We've been feeling this energy start to build. She goes retrograde March 1st. So then we're bam, full on retrograde energy. And then she goes direct April 12th. So at that point, like let's say April 14th, you wanted to make a really big purchase, I might not recommend that yet because we're still going to be feeling some pretty intense Venus retrograde energy at that time. But as we move farther away from April 12th, the energy is going to begin to wane. And as we get a little bit farther, like into later April, early May, we're definitely going to be that energy is definitely going to have dissipated quite a bit. Things are going to be a little bit clearer for us. We're going to have a stronger sense and alignment with our heart, okay? So it really is a matter of discernment. You have to make your own choices. I know a lot of people get frustrated by the retrograde rules. Don't tell me what to do, and I don't want to wait, and I have this. And sometimes you just have stuff come up and you can't avoid it. You know, you might be in the middle of buying a house, or maybe you do meet your twin flame, or whatever it is that comes up. It's not always, a perfect world. It's not always cut and dry. We don't always have the option to say no to certain things during retrograde periods. When those things come up for you, it's meant to happen. My advice is to bring extra conscious awareness to those decisions, to those experiences, because that's really what retrogrades are about. They're really about redirecting, refocusing our consciousness so that we're not just like acting without thinking or feeling. We are really taking the time to reevaluate. do the things that I normally do still fall in alignment with who I truly am and what I want for my life? Okay. So use your discernment, but know that the post retrograde shadow technically lasts until May 12th. Okay. I hope that makes sense. All right. This was kind of a longer one. Thank you for hanging out with me. I'm sorry that my voice is a little scratchy. Thank you for being forgiving and understanding. I hope that you all are doing so well. I am so grateful to be able to do this, to make these videos and to share what I love with you. And yeah, if you guys want to like and subscribe, that really supports me. If you want to follow me or make a donation or schedule an appointment, all the links are going to be listed in the description below. Okay? Thank you so much. I love you all, and I will catch you later. Bye.